Hello, YouTube, internet friends. Love, fear, detachment, and life is cheap. I just finished listening to a dissertation by a fellow called Molyneux, somebody who gets quite a bit of attention on YouTube. He has a channel. He went through his own struggles in life. He apparently even had a cancer that he survived so far. I wish him the best. And he presented us with a dissertation that was quite, what was it? He was passing along an in-depth knowledge of the meaning of the universe in terms of human beings who are just slaves to the owners, what he calls farmers, and we're just like animals being farmed. And he gives us all this fabulous insight into the nature of our reality, how we're manipulated and things aren't working. And before I go there, these are a couple of pieces behind me that will be at my show in Toronto. If you're in Toronto, you can see my astronaut paintings. And these paintings, and this particular ones, these are visors, paintings of primarily visors. And who should be in a visor tonight? Would you like to see who's in a visor? Who might this be? This is a very well-known person. I hope you can recognize him with his teeth coming up into his nose almost. A brilliant, brilliant physicist, theoretician called Stephen Hawking. Yes, I have an image of Stephen Hawking in one of my visors, and not to be outdone, there is another one. What did Neil see when he stepped onto the surface of the moon? Run away, Neil, run away. I think I'll call it run away, Neil, run away. And maybe actually I should show another piece that will be quite interesting in the show. I will be including my mascot, the Age of Fission Man. As you see him lying, he will be an interactive piece actually in the show. You'll have to come and see the show in order to find out what it is I'm doing. So, the show, by the way, I'll put details on the bottom of this video, is going to happen October the 24th to only November 4th. It's only a couple of weeks. And the opening will be on the 27th on Saturday after 6 o'clock, I think, or 5 o'clock. I'll put details down. If you're in Toronto, if you're watching me in Toronto, you can come to my show. I'll be at the opening on Saturday. So I was listening to Stephen Molyneux going on about the nature of our reality, how it is manipulated, how we are always, especially now with this medium, this platform, this YouTube platform, we have access to the opinions, ideas, fabulous, of millions of people. Unfortunately, most of it is all kind of discardable for many different reasons. Even some of the people that I enjoy in many ways that are entertaining, I also primarily discard, like this Stephen Molyneux, a well-meaning person. I think a well-meaning person. You may resent me for saying this because you have attachments to people that you really like, because generally speaking, they tell you what you know, what you already know. I understand this too. I commune with people that are on the same vibration, the same wavelength. So we generally are attracted to people that tell us what we like to hear. It's even more difficult to listen to people that you don't like. I occasionally actually do that as well. I listen to people I don't like in order to see whether there's something that I can gather for myself to grow to be, what is that? I'm not sure. I'm even thinking this morning about biblical stories. One that I really enjoy reflecting on is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is apparently a tree that sunk our human race. Now, Stephen Molyneux should actually maybe go back to biblical stories and check out the tree of the knowledge of good and evil for him to form an opinion of how we are sunk, how we have become mired in a really nasty situation where the owners seem to be able to do whatever the hell they want with us, all the way what I believe to be occurring right now is an extermination of most of life on this planet. Most of life is under threat on this planet, primarily from a nuclear plant called Fukushima that blew up on March 11th, 2011, and it is continuing to spew its ugly toxic material, destroying, possibly virtually has destroyed the Pacific Ocean. I am convinced this is happening, and it's part of the manipulation, the control that we are under, that Stefan Molyneux talks about without really understanding what he is saying. He doesn't have the background, or at least let me put it this way. If he does have the background, he makes sure to avoid implicating himself in the story that he tells. I always say, we need to tell our own story. Our own story is paramount. And I piggyback at times, like this, what I'm mentioning now, I piggyback on other people at times, but in order to clarify something that has changed in myself that I understand, that is so important in order to have an impact. I think people present their stories, like Stefan Molyneux presents his story, I suspect in order to have an impact on people to make the place better. So I respect that in presenters who appear, generally speaking, to try and have their thought processes, their mindfulness, their understanding propagating for, now here's the ultimate invocation in Molyneux's thing, is to wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. So there is this demand, literally, it's a demand. One of the presuppositions or suppositions that many presenters have is it's a demand underlying their presentation for you to wake up. I demand you do not wake up. I demand in anything that I say, I want you to discard and not wake up, because you don't actually need to wake up in order to make the place better. I'm going to go into this. Do not wake up. Do not listen to people that tell you to wake up, because that is part of the inculcation of something to make us feel something that even well-meaning people communicating about some aspect of truth, the moving target, the biggest moving target ever, called truth. This invocation to wake up is quite senseless because, number one, it never works, whether it's through coercion or at times, you know, I have suggested that inspiration can actually facilitate this sense that I also share with Stefan Molyneux for people to wake up. But I realize within myself that there is no point in waking anyone up in that way. I'll get to this. This is interesting for me. Why are we mired in the mucky muck that we're in, especially when we can see this so clearly? This is so obvious. I'll attach the Molyneux thing. It is very clear, but it's treating our existence on a very superficial level. And he always reduces things to a very derogatory or a very low self-esteem is underlying his entire presentation. This is, it's contrary to what people may perceive, but I find his presentations to be subject to a very low self-esteem, and primarily because he is not invoking something within himself that he reveals how he has changed. And, you know, I sometimes think, well, how do I apply this to my life? And I do it through my work, my art. I have certain limitations as a human being. Some are very capable of expressing their feelings openly. I've been someone quite, I think I was afflicted early on not to be able to express myself openly because I had retributions I suffered if I expressed my feelings. So I started to hide away in what is considered my art, my work that I produce. So this work comes out of a desire to express myself honestly and openly, but in a day-to-day sense, this has been somewhat of a struggle for me personally. But I think I'm getting better at it. I think I'm getting better at it, especially identifying people that are undermining me in my own development, my own mission to accomplish something before I leave this mortal coil, this bag of blood. So here's how I would like to synopsize and create context, which is, I think, very important. Something that many YouTubers don't understand is that you can't just provide information and knowledge and even wisdom without the context. There has to be an understanding. I'll give you a brief explanation for this in terms of my own understanding of a story in the Bible, where you have the tree of the knowledge that I've referred to, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and how we finally ultimately ended up being ejected from this place called the Garden of Eden because we partook, human consciousness became aware in some form of something very, very important. And I'll just sort of give a little side note here. I call it conscience. Conscience. It's referred to as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I call it conscience. It's everything. It's everything in our nature. It's the highest part of our nature anyway. It was revealed in this metaphor. And of course, the story goes, if you don't know it, that I think this is in Genesis 2:4, I think, where it's revealed to us that we have something within us that is godlike. That is godlike. This is phenomenal. What is that? The knowledge of the tree of good and evil. Don't partake of it. Don't touch it, because something will revolutionize our nature. So this is part of my understanding. Not that I'm a biblical scholar. I attach myself to biblical teachings, especially the ones that make no sense, but they make no sense because, generally speaking, they're not interpreted very well. Like the King James Version is a bastardized interpretation because King James locked up a bunch of people, 70 or so scholars, and said, don't come out of the room until you have this complex work translated. The Hebrew scriptures and Christian scriptures, I want to translate it properly. And only, I think, 3 of them had knowledge of Hebrew. The scholars, they were Arabic or Aramaic rather, and Greek. There were scholars in Aramaic and Greek, and only 3 Hebrew scholars. And the poor Hebrew guys died before the interpretations and the translations were done. So how can you have a reasonable book with somebody that doesn't actually understand the language? They're making it up as they go along. So that's basically the interpretation of the Bible. Although you get snippets out of it that sometimes make sense. The other tree that is referred to is the tree of life. And this is very Kabbalistic. The tree of life is the energy centers. I think it's a metaphor for our energy centers, things that make us go. I like things that make me go. And this tree apparently is east of Eden. Steinbeck actually refers to east of Eden. I think he had a sense of this. And the character called Cain, who supposedly killed Abel, which is again a bastardization of the true text. Once you begin to read this in its true form, which is actually Numbers, I've said this before, you can research all this. I'm giving you a bit of background to my context, how I create context to Molyneux, people that are presenting themselves on YouTube telling you and me to wake up, and they haven't got a clue. But they spout shit, or I shouldn't say shit. They spout stuff and it makes sense to them, but it's of no meaning because people don't wake up because they know something. That's not how it works. Knowledge and information and even wisdom doesn't get anyone to wake up. It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which was reflected early on in literature to be pivotal in our becoming, who we could be. Anyway, this Cain character, before this incident, I think, occurred, obviously, supposedly, which he didn't kill Abel. This is a whole other thing. I might do a dissertation on this. But he was relegated to the land of Nod, which is east of Eden, where what do we find in the land of Nod but the tree of life? And the tree of life is a fabulous metaphor for understanding everything about how stuff really works. So you put a guy, you punish him, Cain, by putting him into the land of Nod, where you nod off maybe every now and then and have a dream. Oh, have you ever dreamt? Do people out there dream sometimes? Have you ever had a dream that's just so magnificent and inspiring? This is what happens in the land of Nod off. So Cain is dwelling in this land of Nod. Properly translated, as close as we can get, I suppose, is a land of all possible possibilities. This is the wanderer idea. You come across stuff. People are thought of as being like lost to the world, where in fact they're searching. They're finding themselves in the land of Nod. I dwell in the land of Nod. When I come to my studio, I dwell in the land of Nod. And a compatriot of mine is Cain. Yes, you fundamentalists. I commune with the character in the Bible called Cain, the murderer of Abel, the good guy that never shows up again. He disappears, a bag of blood that goes into the earth and disappears. What's this individual to me? Well, he's eradicated because he has no significance to us. This Abel character is never referred to other than, oh, he was a real good guy. He made sacrifices of vegetables to, no, sorry. He made the meat sacrifice. Oh, the meat. He burnt sheep. That's got to stink really bad. He burnt sheep. And Cain burnt his vegetable matter in a sacrifice, in a glorification of the Lord. And I much prefer to burn vegetables to meat, to sheep, to animals. So Abel disappears. Just as a little background to give context to where I'm coming from, how I understand about wake up. Stephen Molyneux, wake up. Go ahead, wake up, people. I always get sort of sidetracked and sidelined. What was I going to say? I started with the idea that love, fear, and detachment. And there's a rudimentary dysfunction, obviously. We all understand this. People that listen to me understand that I'm talking about things that aren't really working. And I always come back to the physical world in the sense that we are facing, I say this with real profound gravity, but I mean, I've said it so many times in many different ways. Wake up! It doesn't really matter. Fukushima, a nuclear plant, has blown up. It's disseminating all its toxic materials every day into the ocean, which will kill the ocean. Plankton, microbiological life is likely already finished in that ocean, which means all the larger creatures are not going to have the nutrients to sustain themselves, which will end their life, which will end our life eventually in 20 years, 30 years, 5 years, 1 year. This is quite difficult to understand and put a timeline on. So my thoughts on presenting my story on YouTube is very much tied to a long history I feel attached to through also the art. I find the art to be an amazing tool to render this feeling I have, to create possibly inspiration, not wisdom, knowledge, information. All that stuff doesn't wake anybody up. It's possible because I have felt myself inspired by people that make me change my way of looking at the world, and then my life changes as well, the way I behave. I think this is paramount in anything that I'm engaged in for it to change my life. Not anyone else, but my life. I'm changing my life. My work is about how I feel, what it is that I'm confronted with. And it may inspire others. It's the highest form that I have found of being able to connect to people. Not to change them and to wake them up, but to have this sense that I had with other people I look at in art history, in my teachers, that inspired me. That's how it works, Stephen Molyneux. You have to inspire people. And every other presenter on this medium, I'm saying to you, take it or leave it, but literally becomes an inspirational thing. And spouting the information about stuff is not going to wake anybody up. Wake up! It's not going to work. That's not how it happens. We have an inner revolution. We have an inner change. Now, here's what I'm going to piggyback on Molyneux again. He was saying that we are just slaves and we're being farmed and all that blah, blah, blah kind of stuff. Now, where does he miss the boat for me is the origins of it. And I've gone into the idea of conscience. Now, how is it that this entire this reality, this existence could be so detoured and diverted over the period of time that we understand to be history, going back, let's say, let's just use their numbers of 6,000 years. 6,000 years of history starting with Egyptians. I've mentioned the idea of a particular fellow, not, what was his name, Akhenaten, Amenhotep the fourth was, I think it was the third or the fourth. He was the father of Tutankhamun, but he basically assumed the responsibility of all of existence on Earth, including what Molyneux says, the farmed animals, us. He took responsibility. Of course, this is tongue-in-cheek. He just sort of made himself the omnipotent being on Earth, and we're still suffering under the remnants of this type of individual that Molyneux points out. But here is the issue for me. It's not the fact that this individual existed or had such influence on us, but that we abdicated something that is innate within all of us. This is what I refer to often, and it affects everything, our entire being, how we present ourselves to the world, the work I make, the presentations on YouTube, my day-to-day life. Everything is affected by this fundamental reality of having tasted the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, which is conscience. This is biblically recorded. It may be interpreted in different ways, but I feel very close to this story because I've understood within myself that unless I act out of this compass within me that everyone has, I've mentioned this many times, it all is of no value or meaning. So if I make presentations on YouTube or anywhere else in my work, and it doesn't originate in this understanding, it really has very little value. All my brilliance and insight into the meaning of the cosmos is of no value unless it originates, again, here's the context of anything that works for me, it originates in this fundamental awareness, this profound, deep, fundamental nature within me that can choose to do the right thing. And it's kind of like a broken record here. And I know, and people that have listened to me often, maybe there's some new people that may come along here and say, well, yeah, but you know, the world is really fucked up and the bastards, yeah, the bastards are getting away with, you would not believe, this is so extreme now, but I'm saying it's not the bastards. What I'm saying is our abdication of this fundamental nature within us. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to stand on the barricades with a placard. I guess if you feel you have to do it that way, go ahead. But I'm saying that my day-to-day actions come out of this fundamental understanding and are motivated by this inner compass. And people have talked about this. We talk about this all the time, and Molyneux, I'm sure, has this thing functioning in himself, but he keeps externalizing it into the bastards that are ruining the joint, which is true, I could go on and on about this, but it means nothing because it's not contextualized in how we fit into it. And waking up isn't going to make anybody fit into this awareness. And the last point I'm going to make on this is how irrational we are in terms of something that is conceived or thought of as being of paramount importance, which is life. And I say life is cheap. The way I see it manifested or represented out there in terms of people, not animals. I'm talking about our species, the human species, represents itself, especially in what Molyneux dissects perfectly, democracies, how they function to undermine our basic nature. And our basic nature is this feeling of attachment to being alive, what it means to be in an existence where we dwell and we experience and we have pleasures and we experience all levels of engagements. We're engaged. We're truly feeling things for ourselves and expressing and all this kind of stuff going on. You got to have life. Now, if everything from what I perceive to be out there is negating life, as I say, we're in a major extermination. We're allowing this extermination to happen, and it happens with the individual. And I'll just give a quick example how I see people, and I've seen this in my own life, in my own relationships, where I see people abdicating their responsibility for their life to people they have no knowledge of, people in white coats that are called doctors, and they can do whatever the hell they want with you, and you take it on, and you say yes, this, without testing it, without questioning it, without saying, well, maybe there is another way. This indicates to me that for the average person life, their life is cheap. And if their life is cheap, all of life is cheap, and we end up with what I consider to be a complete and total extermination by the bastards. I've talked about this before. I'm going to do a video on the extermination. I think I have to. I've done it before, but I'm going to articulate this in detail, how this is unfolding in our lives. But the context, again, is to be connected to the fundamental notion of who we are as living beings. And if the most honored principle of our existence is life itself, and we act as though it's cheap, life is cheap, we have wars, we create enormous suffering, we inflict pain on other creatures, how can I conclude anything other than life is cheap? And this is the manifestation, and people that are presenting themselves on YouTube are contributing to this notion of the cheapness of life, even though they present facts to me that suggest they would like it to be otherwise. But the only way this happens is to have this inner revolution. People, we need major inner revolutions to happen within all of us. We need probably 7 billion heart transplants in order to connect back to the sense that life is actually valuable. Like really, you look at yourself and you say, I'm not going to take anything for granted as it relates to my life. I have trust. I trust certain people, but not the ones that don't prove themselves to me. I'm just not going to walk into a doctor's office and say, do what the hell you want. Unless maybe my arm is falling off, leg falling off, or something traumatic and I can't think and they help me. But I'm saying just in the general sense of my own well-being, I have to rely on myself and people I trust, truly trust, that have done it themselves to appreciate and represent that life is valuable. We need to begin, all of us, to accept this value that is called life, which has been taught to us, which has been propagated as being cheap with all the suffering and with all the wars and the litanies of transgressions against our very nature. This suggests to us we accept that life is cheap. Anyway, it's a bit long, almost 30 minutes. I'll give it a rest here in front of my, this is my Age of Fission man, who will be interactive in my show. He will appear in my show as an interactive work. You'll have to come and see. I'll leave details below.